Friday, November 22nd, 1963. John F. Kennedy served as president during the height of the Cold War. During his presidency, he saw the increase of military spending on both nuclear and conventional forces and increased the number of U.S. advisors in Vietnam from 400 to 16,000. The Bay of Pigs fiasco, the failure of 1,400 Cuban exiles trained by the CIA to invade their own country, began at the start of his presidency. Then there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, resulting in the USSR and the USA signing the Test Ban Treaty, forbidding nuclear testing in the atmosphere. It also established the Hotline, a direct telephone contact between the White House and the Kremlin. During Kennedy's time in office, the Berlin Wall was built by the Soviets in order to stop refugees from fleeing from East Germany to West Germany. In Berlin, he delivered a speech challenging Soviet oppression and gave hope to the people of the city. But in the winter of 1963, the presidency of John F. Kennedy would be tragically cut short. On November 21, 1963, President John F. Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline departed on Air Force One for a 2-day, 5-city tour of Texas. He was to announce his candidacy for the 1964 presidential elections there because Texas was vital for his re-election. Texans needed to be convinced, as the state was largely not in favor of Kennedy's civil rights policies and handling of foreign policies like the Bay of Pigs fiasco. The feuding among Democratic Party leaders there also hindered his chances of re-election, and they needed to be brought together. The next morning on November 22nd, Kennedy made a speech to a large crowd outside the hotel that he had stayed in at Fort Worth, and then made another speech inside, at a breakfast hosted by the local Chamber of Commerce. He would say in the last speech he would ever make, "This is a very dangerous and uncertain world. We would like to live as we once lived, but history will not permit it." The presidential party left the Texas hotel and went by motorcade to Carswell Air Force Base, boarding Air Force One, and landing at Dallas's Love Field Airport a short time later. President Kennedy and his wife shook hands with an enthusiastic crowd and sat in the back seats of their limousine as part of the motorcade. Democratic Texas Governor John Connally and his wife were seated in the seats in front of them. In front of these seats were 2 Secret Service agents. The president's next stop was the Dallas Trade Mart, approximately 10 miles away, where Kennedy was scheduled to deliver another speech. It's estimated that about 200,000 people lined the route to the Trade Mart. The limousine the president was traveling in was an open-top 1961 Lincoln Continental 4-door convertible limousine that was called the SS-100X by the Secret Service. The motorcade moved through Dealey Plaza in downtown Dallas. Nellie Connally, the First Lady of Texas, turned around to the president who was sitting behind her and commented, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you," which President Kennedy acknowledged by saying, "No, you certainly can't." Those were the last words ever spoken by John F. Kennedy. At 12:30 p.m., the motorcade was passing the grassy knoll to the north of Elm Street and moving towards the Texas School Book Depository. Then gunshots were heard. A bullet hit President Kennedy's neck and hit Governor Connally's shoulder and wrist. A second shot then hit President Kennedy in the head, covering the limousine's rear interior with fragments of skull, blood, and brain. The impact was so severe that blood and fragments even landed on the Secret Service car that was following behind. The limousine sped off to Parkland Memorial Hospital within minutes, but it was already too late, and doctors' efforts were in vain. Kennedy was declared dead at 1 p.m. Connally would recover from his wounds. The country and the world was in shock. President Kennedy's body was taken from Parkland Hospital to Love Field and loaded onto Air Force One. At 2:38 p.m., sheltered on board Air Force One in case of further assassination attempts, Lyndon B. Johnson took the oath of office with Jacqueline Kennedy by his side, still wearing her blood-spattered clothes. The oath was administered by U.S. District Court Judge Sarah Hughes. Less than an hour earlier, a person had been arrested by the police. Witnesses had reported hearing and seeing shots from different directions, but several accounts mentioned the southeast corner window on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. Only 2 employees from the building were missing, one who had walked outside and wasn't allowed back into the building by police at the time of the shooting, and another, Lee Harvey Oswald, who had only been working there for a month. He had been seen and described by the witnesses who saw him in the sixth-floor window, so a description was sent out by the police. As he moved down the floors, he was encountered by Dallas police officer Marion L. Baker, who had his gun drawn. He was allowed to pass, however, because Oswald's supervisor identified him as an employee. Oswald had slipped out of the book depository after the shooting, had walked several blocks, caught a city bus, and then hailed a taxi that took him straight to his boarding house. There he picked up a pistol and a coat and began to walk aimlessly. Oswald had already left the scene on a bus to his boarding house by 12:40 p.m., but the police did discover a rifle underneath some boxes and its shells by the window on the sixth floor as witnesses had described. The police identified it as a 7.65 Mauser, but later the FBI announced that the police were mistaken and the rifle was an Italian Carcano M91 38 bolt-action rifle. The second-hand Italian-made Carcano rifle had been purchased by Oswald earlier in the year, under the alias A. Heidel. The Carcano was a notoriously inaccurate weapon, and for many it's hard to believe that with such a weapon, Oswald, despite his former military training, could hit a moving target like the president twice with such precision at a range of approximately 250 feet. Shortly afterwards, a Dallas policeman by the name of J.D. Tippett was patrolling his usual area and saw a man who fitted the Oswald description on the corner of 10th Street and Patton Avenue. After a brief exchange of words, Oswald shot Tippett 4 times with a .38 revolver, killing him in front of witnesses. Oswald ran to the nearby Commercial Street of Jefferson Boulevard. A man named Johnny Calvin Brewer noticed his suspicious behavior and followed Oswald for several blocks to the Texas Theater. Oswald ducked there without buying a ticket. Brewer hailed the police officer, Nick McDonald, who entered the theater accompanied by another officer. Both officers apprehended Oswald on the stage of the Texas Theater, 6 blocks away from the scene of the crime, at 1:50 p.m. When Oswald was arrested, he was carrying a forged identity card bearing the name Alec J. Heidel, the alias he used to buy the rifle. However, Texas law imposed no control over the purchase of weapons. There was no reason to buy it under an assumed name. So why did Oswald buy the rifle and a handgun by mail order under his assumed name? Curiously, Army intelligence was known to have a file on A.J. Heidel, the contents of which were destroyed before it could be acquired by investigators. On Sunday morning, November 24th, after being held for 2 nights, Oswald was being transferred from city jail to the county jail. The event was being broadcast live on TV for millions of Americans to see. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a man shot a pistol point blank at Oswald, who died 2 hours later in Parkland Memorial Hospital. The man who fired the pistol was Jack Ruby, a local nightclub owner. He said that he killed Oswald to spare Mrs. Kennedy the discomfiture of coming back to trial. The state funeral for President Kennedy was held on November 25, 1963, with representatives from more than 100 countries and millions of viewers watching it on television. On November 29, 1963, President Lyndon B. Johnson created the President's Commission on the Assassination of President John F. Kennedy, also known as the Warren Commission, after its chairman, Earl Warren, Chief Justice of the United States. Its 888-page final report was presented to Johnson on September 24, 1964. The Warren report concluded that Oswald, who had become a skilled marksman as a Marine, had fired 3 shots, one that entered Kennedy's neck and exited through his throat before hitting Connally, one that hit Kennedy in the back of the head, the fatal shot, and one that missed the president but ricocheted off a piece of sidewalk which injured James Tague. Many disagreed with these findings and argued instead that there had been a second shooter on the grassy knoll in Dealey Plaza that the motorcade had been approaching, and there were witnesses who thought they had heard shots coming from the direction of a railroad beyond the knoll. The report, however, concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby had acted alone, although the findings of the Warren Commission continue to be controversial.